Chapter 10. Hydrogen. A major distraction. While the rest of the world locked itself down inside a COVID-19 shroud, gas companies were busy attempting to rewrite European energy policy. They succeeded in inserting hydrogen into many future energy scenarios. These were supposed to be clean, green, and superior to the obvious scenario in which electricity generated by renewables predominated. They actually stand in a category all on their own, where hype is king, and the economics of making and distributing hydrogen are not mentioned. The gas companies had help from the chemical industries, where hydrogen is an essential feedstock, particularly in Germany. In an article published by Bloomberg in 2020, the following quote appears. The late Frank Zappa once said that stupidity, rather than hydrogen, was the most common element on the planet. What he did not tell us is that the two combine to create the alloy hopium, which has an extraordinary ability to absorb public and private money. Hopium is alive and thriving in Europe and in the UK. The campaign to insert hydrogen into all future energy scenarios was one of the most successful ever in EU history. A staggering sum of €550 billion was allocated in the EU Energy Planning Strategy for the manufacture and distribution of green hydrogen. It was reasoned that a way to cope with the intermittency and variability of renewables would be to make hydrogen from water when there was a surplus of green energy. The hydrogen could then be used to power vehicles, heat buildings, and generate electricity, or even be stored for later use. Lately, those scenarios and assumptions have finally come under increased scrutiny. Most notably, the European Union's own auditor, the European Court of Auditors, tasked with ensuring that the EU collects, spends, and manages its finances prudently, has called for a reality check of the EU's green hydrogen industrial policy. The EU should decide on the strategic way forward towards decarbonisation without impairing the competitive situation of key EU industries or creating new strategic dependencies. Steph Block, the ECA member in charge of the audit, told journalists on the 17th of July 2024. Challenges remain all along the hydrogen value chain, and the EU is unlikely to meet its 2030 targets for the production and import of renewable hydrogen. The auditors call for a reality check to ensure that the EU's targets are realistic, ECA wrote in a statement. These targets were not based on a robust analysis. They were driven by political will. In light of its findings, the ECA has asked the European Commission to update its hydrogen strategy. Hydrogen inefficiencies. Electricity must be stored in batteries, directly or perhaps in pumped hydro storage or compressed air storage. It has been proposed that hydrogen can be made from water and stored awaiting some time when electricity is needed and is not available from renewable sources. This is possible, of course, but expensive. As part of a sustainable future, hydrogen as a feedstock must be made from water, H2O. The process used is electrolysis, a technology in which electricity is pumped into very clean water. H2O is cracked into its components, oxygen and hydrogen. If electrolysis is to be sustainable, the fundamental requirement is that the electricity used to produce it is sustainable. As acknowledged elsewhere, there is a need to replace the circa 93 million tonnes of hydrogen industrial process feedstock, which is now made from natural gas, with clean hydrogen, which is made by cracking water in the electrolysis process. That said, about 1/3 of this current hydrogen is used in oil and gas production, so the replacement amount is proportionately lower. This hydrogen-making process using natural gas is responsible for emissions totaling 840 million tonnes of CO2 every year. There may be other areas where water-derived hydrogen can play an important role, which we examine in this chapter. A key point is that electricity is the energy source used to crack water. It accounts for as much as 70% of the cost of making clean hydrogen from water, which is therefore incredibly sensitive to the cost of electricity. It takes roughly 55 kilowatt-hours of electricity to make 1 kilogram of hydrogen in the electrolysis process. Remember that number. So, commercially, it has to be made from the cheapest possible renewable energy. From a European viewpoint, it is hard to see hydrogen manufacture as a competitive industry here. It is possible to produce electricity using photovoltaics powered by radiation from the sun for $0.015 per kilowatt-hour in Chile, South Africa, and in many places which have desert climates. These places have sparsely populated sunny areas, and so large-scale production is possible. We in Europe will not be able to compete with these prices. Solar is quite suitable as an energy source for the manufacture of hydrogen. It is an intermittent energy source. When there is no sunshine, no hydrogen gets produced. This is actually okay because there is no big start-up procedure in electrolysis. It is chemically rather than mechanically driven. The hydrogen is stored in special vessels, and the water sits there waiting to be electrolyzed using the next charge of electricity. So, if we need to make 93 million tonnes of hydrogen, or even 60 million, we should do that where electricity is abundant, cheap, and dedicated to the process. The second most important point is that the H2O molecule is very stable. This means cracking it requires a lot of energy. In fact, the only proven and commercial technology that exists today is relatively inefficient. If 100 megawatt-hours of clean electricity, or indeed electricity from any source, is used to manufacture hydrogen, then 59 to 65 megawatt-hours of useful hydrogen energy is produced. Advocates tell us that 70% is possible with PEM electrolyzers. But this is creative chemical accounting. For processes where there is absolutely no alternative to hydrogen, then this inefficiency can be seen as the price of decarbonisation, which can be supported. For all other uses, efficiency of the electron should prevail. Electrolysis of water using electricity can split water into its components, oxygen and hydrogen. 4 technological processes are possible: alkaline, proton exchange membrane, anion exchange membrane, and solid oxide. But none have been used at industrial scale. The efficiency of converting electricity to hydrogen is currently 59%. An IRENA report of 2020 demonstrates an efficiency of 65% is possible using the lower heating value of hydrogen. This means that if hydrogen were to be used, at current efficiency of 59%, to power transport using the internal combustion engine, very little, 12%, of the renewable energy would find its way to drive the vehicle's wheels. If the efficiency were 65%, then the overall amount of electricity that would find its way into driving the wheels would be 13%. If fuel cells were to be used in place of the internal combustion engine in the vehicle, then 30% of the electrical energy only would be used at 59% efficiency. At an efficiency of 65%, the amount of energy driving the wheels would be 32.5%. As against this, electricity put directly into the batteries of cars and lorries has an efficiency of circa 85%. Hydrogen has been touted as an energy storage mechanism because wind and solar are variable and intermittent in output. They cannot be turned up and down as customer demand varies. This leads to the proposition that hydrogen could be made when demand for electricity is low, and the installed wind and solar plant are producing strongly. It was seen as a method of energy storage as an alternative to electricity storage in batteries. In the past, when lead-acid batteries were the norm, hydrogen storage could be seen as theoretically competitive in the future. Battery efficiencies. However, lithium-ion batteries, LIB, are the predominant form of electricity storage today. They have fallen in price by 75% over the past 10 years. Lithium-ion batteries seem to be following the same path as photovoltaics, which have made a profound impact on renewable energy generation, with their price falling by 90% since 2009. Scale matters in the case of photovoltaics, and this is being replicated in the case of batteries. For example, the cost of LIBs dropped from over $1,000 per kilowatt hour in the early 2000s to circa $151 per kilowatt hour currently. Price is one parameter, perhaps the only that is intuitively easy to compare. Less intuitive is the concept of power density, which describes the amount of energy that can be stored in any given weight or volume of battery storage material. The specific energy density of LIBs has increased from 150 to circa 300 watt-hours per kilogram in recent decades. The energy density of different types of rechargeable batteries is as follows. A lead-acid battery ranges between 50 and 70 watt-hours per kilogram. A nickel-cadmium battery ranges between 50 and 80 watt-hours per kilogram. A nickel-metal hydride battery ranges between 60 and 140 watt-hours per kilogram. A lithium-ion battery ranges between 150 and 300 watt-hours per kilogram. Lithium-ion stands at the top of the pile in power density terms. A battery with high energy density has a longer battery runtime in relation to the battery size. A battery with high energy density can therefore deliver the same amount of energy in a smaller footprint than a battery with lower energy density. This greatly expands the possibilities for battery applications. Figure 39 shows how power density improved from 1985 to 2005. It probably explains why Elon Musk bet heavily on lithium-ion as the power source for his Tesla cars. Like everything else in business, competition is the norm. Hydrogen competes with batteries as an energy storage mechanism. Batteries are winning hands down in this particular context. Let us examine this proposition with some cases from the real world, as distinct from the hopium universe of hydrogen advocates. Electric cars are the fastest growing segment of the personal motoring industry. They take power directly from the electricity grid, store it in lithium-ion batteries, and deliver it to motors, which drive the wheels. There is no combustion involved. There are consequently fewer parts in a battery electric vehicle, BEV, than in an internal combustion car. In a Handelsblatt article, How Electric Cars Will Charge Germany's Job Market, it was stated, while an electric car consists of some 200 parts, there are more than 1,000 parts in gasoline or diesel vehicles. But their real competitive advantage compared to hydrogen-powered vehicles lies in the basic energy needed to drive them. The use of hydrogen will necessitate a far greater investment in generation equipment. Figure 40 shows how if 10 wind turbines were to be built to power electricity-driven cars using LIB, 57 would have to be built if an internal combustion engine were powered by green hydrogen, and 23 would have to be built if a fuel cell were powered by green hydrogen. Fuel cells have been tested extensively over the past 20 years. They are inefficient when compared with batteries and lead to far higher investments in generation equipment. These considerations led to Elon Musk calling them fuel cell cars. In 2020, Bloomberg stated, "In 2003, the EU-backed European Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Technology Platform forecast up to 5 million hydrogen cars on the streets by 2020, replacing 5% of transport fuel with hydrogen. Japan targeted 5 million fuel cell vehicles by 2020. George W. Bush said fuel cell cars would be competitive with internal combustion ones by 2010 and would eliminate over 11 million barrels per day of US oil demand by 2040. Back in the real world, there are still fewer than 20,000 heavily subsidised hydrogen fuel cell vehicles on the roads globally, served by around 400 almost exclusively publicly funded hydrogen filling stations, it noted. There are 3 commercial hydrogen models on the market: the Toyota Mirai, the Hyundai Nexo, and the Honda Clarity. They have no more range than comparable-sized battery electric vehicles, BEVs. They are no lighter. They have less luggage space, those pressurized hydrogen tanks. They have half the acceleration and a lower top speed. And they have more moving parts, meaning higher maintenance costs. If none of that has dissuaded you from buying one, there's the price. Up to 20% higher than any equivalent BEV. If you want a funny-looking 2-seater for the same monthly lease cost as a Tesla 3, there's always the River Simple Raza. When it comes to refueling, most BEV drivers do it at home or work, eliminating regular trips to the gas station. On the odd longer trip, rapid chargers can add 200 miles of range, about as far as most people want to drive between bathroom breaks, in 20 minutes. Concerns about lack of on-street and motorway charging are like turn-of-the-millennium concerns about internet bandwidth. Would video on demand ever work? Short answer, yes. Undeterred by all this, the Hydrogen Council, a fast-growing association of the largest industrial names promoting hydrogen, still sees 1 in 12 cars sold in California, Germany, Japan, and South Korea by 2030 powered by hydrogen. Cumulative sales of 13 million and 10,000 filling stations, as Bloomberg says, in their dreams. As evidence accumulates, the hydrogen lobby has all but conceded private motoring will be electric. They still hold on to the vision that heavy goods vehicles will be powered by hydrogen. The economics of heavy goods vehicle, HGV transport, figure 41, are no different from those of private motoring. In some respects, planning for electricity-powered HGV transport is easier to accomplish and leads to greater commercial gains than for private sector motoring. A report by financial services firm Hitachi Capital found switching vans and HGVs to electric or other alternative fuels could save British businesses as much as £14 billion a year. It claims EVs run at 13 pence cheaper per mile than diesel-fueled vans, while HGVs are reported to be 38 pence cheaper. That adds up to total savings of £13.7 billion a year if all Britain's commercial vehicles were switched. The move to a fully electrified transport system is already underway. The number of registered electric cars increased by 280% in the UK over the previous 4 years, the Hitachi report found. Growth continues, with market analysts forecasting a doubling of EV cars from 2024 to 2030. According to the IEA, global annual EV car sales grew 35% in 2023, or 18% of car sales, to a total of 40 million. Just under 60% of these were in China, followed by 25% in Europe and 10% in the US. EV sales stalled in some markets during the first half of 2024, with the notable exception of China, which approached 1 million European sales in monthly EV and hybrid sales in May, though the impact of tariffs imposed by the EU and the US had yet to take effect. 2 parallel but conflicting narratives were at play. EVs are increasing market share in many instances. The UK enjoyed a record-breaking month in August by reaching 23% of the new car market. Sales rose 10% year-on-year, with evidence of the market's growing competitiveness. But in many other, more challenging jurisdictions, there is a reduction in the rate of growth, despite significant year-on-year growth. It is revealing to focus on local dips in sales growth figures, which do not suggest an actual overall decline. 2023 sales were probably abnormally high due to a number of factors, including a lot of cars ordered as early as the previous January 2022 being cancelled due to persisting supply chain challenges, exacerbated by consequences from the Ukrainian war. The Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland, SEAI, provided the Irish context. The first quarter of 2024 saw the first ever reduction in EV sales, after 2023 had the highest sales ever for EVs in Ireland. The COVID-19 pandemic, it noted, had long-lasting implications for the auto industry, exacerbating those supply chain issues, which left a pent-up demand. While 2022 saw a rise in EV sales, full catch-up happened in 2023. Overall, there was a 45% increase in BEV registrations in 2023 compared to 2022, with BEVs representing 18% of the market share. All vehicle registrations increased by 16% in 2023 compared with 2022, again a huge increase. When comparing the first 3 months of 2024 with 2023, there's only an 8% increase, which reflects a slowdown across the board. In July 2023, the Irish government's EV grant for motorists reduced from €5,000 to €3,500. This was to allow for greater investment in public charging infrastructure. This caused a spike in grant applications by consumers looking to avail of the higher grant. At the end of 2023 into 2024, several brands cut the price of their new EVs and began to bring the purchase of new EVs similar to that of a new ICE vehicle. This had a knock-on effect on used EVs, bringing down the sale price further and making EVs more affordable for potential buyers. EVs available in Ireland since 2010 in the first phase were acquired by early adopters and enthusiasts eager to switch from fossil fuel-powered vehicles. It is now in the early majority phase. Choice of EV models is much better, and the distance an EV can travel without charging, the range, has also increased massively. This has had a direct impact on increased sales. In tandem, an increase in public charging infrastructure is reducing range anxiety and giving people the confidence to make the switch, while there is greater recognition that EVs are cheaper to run and are better for the environment, with no tailpipe emissions. Global manufacturers insisted the 2024 slowdown was temporary, pointing to strong global demand for solid-state batteries, a view confirmed by the International Energy Agency. There was less optimism in Europe, however, as its nascent battery industry was reeling from the global slowdown in electric car sales, forcing companies to cancel or postpone projects that would have powered more than 2 million EVs for a year. Retrenchment by the Volkswagen Group in Germany and Volvo revising its plans to have an all-electric fleet by 2030, however, was a chilling reminder no one is immune to the consequences of tight profitability in the EV sector. The EU's corporate car market stagnation is explained by poor progress in fleet electrification in Germany, France, Italy and Spain, according to Transport and Environment. With EV sales hitting a speed bump and car makers slowing investment in EVs amid concerns about profitability, Goldman Sachs research analysts lowered their near-term sales forecasts, though they predicted falling battery prices would eventually boost EV sales. It lowered its forecast for growth in global battery demand in 2024 to 29% year-over-year, compared to its previous projection of 35%. Battery demand is estimated to have increased 31% in 2023. The medium-term prediction is for sustained EV sales and growth up to 2030. Already, the price of plug-in hybrids in China has fallen below combustion car engines, which is expected to be replicated soon in other car markets. With manufacturers cutting EV prices in the face of growing competition, some models becoming available were at a comparable price to their petrol and diesel equivalents. The conclusion cannot be avoided that as long as markets in Europe and elsewhere remain open to Chinese technologies, sales will continue to grow as the Chinese manufacturers yet again have beaten everyone else to it. Fair trade should be a global ambition. However, to limit their technology in our markets with tariffs or sanctions, as is happening in the US and the EU, is only going to slow decarbonisation of transport at the immediate expense of public health, and ultimate cost in the form of a disrupting climate. The bottom line is EV sales need to accelerate. Failure to reach demanding targets is going to put carbon budgets out of reach unless there is an urgent course correction. The direction of travel, nonetheless, could not be clearer. The EU ban on the sale of new ICE vehicles is due in 2035, and there is a consensus among car makers that everything will go electric, even in the US. It is just a question of when. And in the electric versus hydrogen-fueled cars debate, the EV is winning hands down, as battery electric cars are at least 3 times more efficient than hydrogen fuel cell cars due to energy losses, T&E analysis has found. Heavy goods vehicles. Sales of electric buses are driving growth in the heavy goods vehicles, HGV, segment. During 2023, over 50% of bus sales in China and several European countries were electric. The Chinese city of Shenzhen's entire fleet of 16,359 buses has gone electric, a transition that began in 2009 and has been assisted by an 80% drop in the cost of a lithium-ion battery pack. According to Bloomberg New Energy Finance, China's need for electric bus batteries is almost on par with that of all global EV battery demand. China could be said to be driving the market. Just as it has done in other segments of the energy transition, taking an early lead in electric buses domestically has allowed China to take significant market share for exports, e.g. supplying 85% of the Latin American sales in electric buses in 2023. There are 2 methods of charging heavy goods vehicles, HGVs, charging while parked and charging on the move. This is obviously quite similar to what happens at present with private cars. The difference is size and the quantity of electricity needed to simultaneously charge a small fleet of such vehicles. Given the properties of electricity, in particular as more cities and towns electrify, we expect there will be more options to charge on the move. Most railway transport is currently electrified by means of overhead lines. Interestingly, a high-temperature superconducting DC cable system is planned for the Montparnasse railway station in Paris. The restricted space available in the city's underground makes superconducting technology the only viable solution for increasing the power supply from the tracks to the railway traction substation. Electricity offtake devices mounted on the roofs of railway carriages conduct electricity to motors, which drive the railway carriages. Such devices could be used to conduct electricity into batteries with high charging rates. In this scheme, the offtake devices would be flush with the roof of trucks until they began their drive under a set of charging wires. There, the offtake devices would rise up and come into contact with the charging wires. These overhead wires are sometimes referred to as catenary devices. Alternatively, as happens with, for instance, the London Underground, charging could be accomplished from below. The metal wheels of the carriages conduct the electricity upwards into the batteries. There is a second way of charging from below, a non-contact way. Use is made of the electrical properties of capacitance and inductance to charge vehicles either on the move or when parked. The pace of battery technology advancement is happening faster than we thought, and battery costs are also dropping faster than anticipated. As a result, newly available zero-emission trucks generally, and heavy-duty zero-emission trucks in particular, are shifting towards commercialization at an accelerating pace. According to Dr. Cristiano Fasana, Global Director of CalStart's Global Commercial Vehicle Drive to Zero program in 2021. Singling out the US market, Drive to Zero's Zero Emission Technology Inventory, ZETI, an online tool, in 2022 anticipated an even sharper uptick in available ZE heavy-duty truck models, from 8 in 2020 to 28 in 2023, or a 250% bump. At time of writing, July 2024, this same tool identified 62 OEMs providing 175 electric HGV models available in the US. Meanwhile, 49 OEMs now supply 157 models to Europe. The driving range of electric trucks is also increasing. Many available ZE heavy-duty trucks are now capable of driving over 600 kilometres on a single charge, up from the 300 kilometres noted in the first edition of this book, while the much-anticipated Tesla Semi has now launched with an estimated 800-kilometre range, boasting a 70% charge in just 30 minutes. Meanwhile, in Europe, there are prototypes at demonstration stage for megawatt charging systems. Research suggests that long-distance transport operations will require a network of high-powered truck charging stations at highway rest stops and parking areas. The results show that charging posts capable of delivering peak power of 1 megawatt should be installed every 50 kilometres along core highway routes. This can eliminate all time losses from charging. There has been much hype around fuel cells, and considerable investment has been made into their development. Are they the technology that the hydrogen lobby can use to suggest that all future heavy goods vehicles be powered by hydrogen? Not necessarily, says Oak Hoekstra, a researcher at Eindhoven Technical University. First, he found 90% of 40-ton trucks entering and leaving the port of Rotterdam drive less than 750 kilometres per day. After optimising the truck's drag, that means a 1 megawatt-hour battery weighing 6 tonnes based on today's technology, but on track to decrease to 3 or 4 tonnes within the decade. What he also found was that replacing the internal combustion drivetrain with electric motors would save up to 3 tonnes, meaning that in terms of payload, between BVs and traditional trucks, it's almost a wash. As for fueling, as long as trucks have drivers, they need to stop for breaks, 45 minutes per 4.5 hours in the EU. This is borne out by a road freight decarbonisation study published by the RISE Research Institutes of Sweden in 2024, which found that in all scenarios for 2035, battery electric freight trucks were the clear economic choice. It is possible to envisage in Europe sufficient large charging stations to effectively service all heavy goods and small, intermediate and large commercial vehicles. I have done a simple construct to decide on the number of heavy goods charging stations that would be needed in Ireland to charge the HGV fleet. I came up with a number of 29. If this number were scaled for the area of Europe including Great Britain and Norway, then some 1,750 charging stations would be needed. If the Irish number were scaled for population, then some 2,900 large charging stations would be needed. In densely populated areas such as Germany, the UK and the Netherlands, large stations would be replaced by dozens of smaller ones. It is possible to envisage 10,000 charging stations for HGVs across the continent of Europe, driverless vehicles will be a feature of future transport. There is a limit to the number of hours drivers are allowed to drive at present. This limitation would disappear, and usage of vehicles would increase, at least twofold. As well as reducing costs of goods, driverless vehicles would be an easier proposition to integrate into a continent-wide electricity charging network. All of these trends point to batteries winning the private and fleet mobility battle over hydrogen. Space heating. Natural gas and oil are the main providers of premises heating in the developed world. In addition to these, various other forms of primary energy, such as wood, biomass, coal, and peat, are used in some places. Premises heating can use either hydrogen or electricity as a replacement for these fossil fuels. We should note that infrastructure to use hydrogen widely is not in place. A new transmission system, distribution system, and boilers would be needed, as the piping that is used to transport natural gas is not suitable for hydrogen transport beyond 15%. The Global Witness Foundation, a registered charitable organisation based in the US, has noted gas companies want Europeans to heat their homes using hydrogen instead of fossil gas, a position the European Commission has said it will allow. But this could cost more than double what consumers currently pay for already expensive gas. And if companies lobbying the EU get what they have asked for, all gas users, even those who do not want to use hydrogen, could be forced to pay €240 billion to fund hydrogen infrastructure they do not need. It added, switching homes to hydrogen requires an immense overhaul of Europe's energy infrastructure, a big commitment by the EU and the consumers who will pay for it. We would need to build electrolyzers that will convert electricity into hydrogen, new pipes and pumps that push it into homes. Most of those used for fossil gas do not work for hydrogen. And we need to buy boilers that run on the new fuel and meters that measure how much we are using. The European Court of Auditors' request for the European Commission to provide a reality check for its hydrogen strategy, including its financial prudence and targets, must be welcomed. Analysis by the energy market consultancy Element Energy for Global Witness outlines the cost of switching European households from gas to hydrogen. It has produced studies for a range of governments, companies, and non-profits, and estimated how much it would cost to build and operate the infrastructure needed to get hydrogen into homes. Also included is how much it would cost to build and operate the renewable energy facilities needed to produce hydrogen in the first place. Element Energy's study presents 3 price scenarios for hydrogen, of which €1,580 is the central annual household estimated cost. Average bills could be as high as €2,170 per year or dip to €1,440, still nearly double recent gas prices. Each scenario is an average across the EU, with people in some countries paying more and others paying less. Scenarios are for an average-sized household, with larger homes paying more and smaller apartments paying less. The scenarios are based upon estimated infrastructure costs, and they are discounted for long-term inflation. But the data on which they rely was produced before recent inflation spikes, which would likely increase some costs. And they assume that hydrogen will be produced using renewable energy and not fossil gas, so that it does not contribute to the climate crisis. There is another, cheaper way to heat premises using sustainable electricity. See Figure 42. That is by fitting heat pumps adjacent to the premises. Using a heat pump, which operates like a fridge in reverse, electricity captures and concentrates the heat available in the environment and supplies it to the premises. Heat pumps are a fabulously efficient way of heating premises. For every unit of electricity that is used by the heat pump, between 3 and 5 units of heat is delivered to the house. This is the case even in cooler climates. If this method of heating is contrasted to a hydrogen-burning heating system, its true competitive advantage emerges. The best that can be accomplished in a hydrogen-burning heating system is that 95% of the energy in the hydrogen is turned into heat for the house. Even with a fairly average SCOP, a unit used for measuring heat pump efficiency, low ground and air source heat pump running costs can drastically cut heating bills for those currently using electric storage heaters, about 69% cheaper than what you're currently paying. What's more, a well-designed system with a flow temperature of 40 degrees Celsius or even 35 degrees Celsius in a properly insulated home is capable of achieving an SCOP of 4 and over. Taking it one step further, generating your own electricity would significantly reduce the running costs of a heat pump. From a consumption perspective, installing solar panels could effectively see your heat pump working at an SCOP of 7 or above. The cost of installing a heat pump and a hydrogen gas boiler is somewhat similar. The differences are that no pollution results from heat pumps, whereas gas or oil release CO2. The running costs are far lower as the gain in heat energy from using heat pumps is 3 to 5 times that of a gas boiler. Currently, the majority of electricity is produced by burning gas, so the prices of electricity and gas are related. In a renewable future, the price of gas and electricity become decoupled as wind and solar increase their penetration. Equally, it is likely that carbon pollution taxes will be applied to gas, and so heat pump running costs will comparatively reduce. As noted in the Bloomberg report, heat pumps are usually associated with low temperature heat, up to 60 degrees Celsius. But there has been a quiet revolution over the past decade. Industrial heat pumps already work for temperatures up to 160 degrees Celsius, with a coefficient of performance of 3, which translates to energy savings of 66%. Add in losses from electrolysis, compression, and transport of hydrogen, and you could see an 80% energy saving by using a heat pump. According to current research, the temperature range of industrial heat pumps can be pushed to 280 degrees Celsius and beyond. This would allow, in theory, heat pumps to serve well over a third of industrial heat demand, everything required in pulp, paper, food processing and tobacco, plus preheating for higher temperature processes like glass manufacturing, cement and chemicals. Again, to quote Bloomberg, how realistic is the provision of industrial heat via electricity? A strong candidate for the most important academic paper of the year has just been accepted for publication in Environmental Research Letters. Sylvia Mededou of the Potsdam Institute and her co-authors looked at 11 industry sectors, making up 92% of Europe's industrial CO2 emissions. The answer? Some 78% of heat demand could be met electrically using technologies already in existence. The figure increases to 99% if you include technologies that are under development. Figure 43, reproduced courtesy of Michael Liebrich of Liebrich Associates, attempts to show where hydrogen will most likely be used in a decarbonised society. At the top of the ladder, we have processes and products where the use of hydrogen is unavoidable. At the bottom is a list of areas where the use of hydrogen is uncompetitive. Hard to abate sectors. Around 93 million tonnes of hydrogen are used as feedstock in the chemical industries worldwide. It releases 840 million tonnes of CO2 each year. It is all made from natural gas at the moment. In a decarbonised world, this hydrogen will be manufactured by electrolysis. Steel. The steel industry is a global activity which is responsible for a large quantity of CO2 emissions, almost double the amount of steel created, 1.85 tonnes of carbon dioxide per 1 tonne of steel. If steel were a country, it would be the fifth largest producer of carbon emissions in the world. In fact, between 7% and 9% of all fossil fuel-based emissions are derived from the steel industry. The amount of steel produced in 2018 was 1.8 billion tonnes, which equates to about 3.3 billion tonnes of carbon emissions from the sector, out of total global emissions of 40 billion tonnes. Hydrogen technologies offer a viable pathway to slash the emissions from making steel, according to Kobad Bhavnagri, head of special projects at Bloomberg NEF. No big R&D breakthroughs are necessary. If policy was in place, mainly given the right price on carbon emissions, the world could start producing green steel within a decade. Hydrogen can do everything coal does in the steel-making process, and the technology to make fossil-free steel is already currently operating with natural gas in many parts of the world. If the annual production of CO2 from steelmaking amounts to 3.3 billion tonnes, the oxygen content of this amounts to 2.4 billion tonnes. If this oxygen were to be removed from the iron ore using hydrogen, then some 300 million tonnes of hydrogen would be necessary to achieve this purpose. To put this in perspective, this is 300,000 15-megawatt wind turbines generating electricity only to supply the steel industry. If we use lower numbers, such as 1.3 tonnes of CO2 per tonne of steel, and reduce some steel production over time to, say, 1.5 billion tonnes, the industry would be responsible for 1.95 billion tonnes per year, and still require over 170,000 very large wind turbines running full-time to decarbonise. Imagine how hard this is to achieve without distractions like hydrogen cars and hydrogen boilers. Steelmaker SSAB, together with state-owned utility Vattenfall and mining company LKAB in Sweden, started test operations at Hybrit pilot plant for fossil-free steel in Luleå. SSAB is aiming for the first commercially competitive fossil-free steel in 2026 and to make its entire operations fossil-free by 2045. While hydrogen has strong potential in steelmaking, it is not the only low-carbon steel manufacturing solution. Direct electrolysis to reduce iron ore into iron, similar to aluminium smelting, is being brought to market by MIT startups like Boston Metals and the iron mining giant Fortescue. Further, hydrogen and solutions like Boston Metals are only needed for new steel. The United States has been meeting 70% of its new steel needs with scrap metal processes through electric arc furnaces for over 20 years. Europe is far below that, at 40 to 50%. Electric arc furnaces, by definition, have lower energy requirements and lower carbon emissions than new steel through coke reduction of iron ore and coal-powered blast furnaces, and will grow in every geography, including Europe. The speed of such growth will be determined by the enabling environment established by policy and market structures. In other words, it is, in part, a decision. It remains to be seen whether hydrogen or other approaches will prove most scalable and economically competitive. Growth for hydrogen demand for steel is not a foregone conclusion. As happens with all change, the coke producers, who have no other use for coking coal, will strongly oppose the moving of iron ore smelting away from their product. Air and water transport. Much of the hydrogen debate centres on long-range shipping and aeroplane propulsion. While it is probable that batteries will power almost all local shipping, such as ferries, it is thought likely that intercontinental shipping would be more effectively powered using ammonia as an energy source. Ammonia has a chemical composition of NH3. That is 3 atoms of hydrogen and 1 atom of nitrogen. It is a stable chemical, Compared with hydrogen or natural gas, it is more easily transported. All these gases are transported as liquids. Transport costs vary almost exponentially with reducing temperature. The lower the temperature, the more costly it is to transport various liquefied gases. Natural gas liquefies at minus 153 degrees Celsius. Hydrogen liquefies at minus 253 degrees Celsius, and ammonia at minus 33 degrees Celsius, making it much cheaper to transport ammonia. Hydrogen is the lightest element. It is one of the unexpected facts that more hydrogen is transported using ammonia than transporting hydrogen itself. According to the US Department of Energy, ammonia has a volumetric hydrogen density of about 45% higher than that of liquid hydrogen. Ammonia has a number of favourable attributes, the primary one being its high capacity for hydrogen storage, based on its molecular structure. Aeroplane propulsion is a unique form of transport. It requires a fuel that is light and highly energetic, such as kerosene, that powers aircraft engines at the moment. It accounts for about 2% of global emissions currently, but one can easily envisage a continuing upward movement in these emissions. It is anticipated that there will be an explosion in air transport over the coming 30 years. Small aeroplanes can be powered by batteries, almost as an extension of drones, but it is very difficult to imagine the current or future fleets of Boeing and Airbus aircraft being powered by batteries. Weight is the issue with commercial aircraft. Although batteries are reducing in weight and carrying more stored electricity, I cannot see them powering 200-seater or larger aircraft. Jet fuel has an energy density of 46 megajoules per kilogram. There are biofuel replacements for jet fuels based on oilseed crops like rapeseed, canola, palm oil, etc. These are processed to remove their OH atoms using transesterification to create fuels which are almost identical chemically to kerosene. This is to remove oxygen from the molecule. Oxygen just adds weight and reduces the energy content for a given weight of fuel. According to the US Department of Energy's Office of Efficiency and Renewable Energy, an estimated 1 billion dry tons of biomass can be collected sustainably each year in the United States, enough to produce 50 to 60 billion gallons of low-carbon biofuels. These resources include corn grain, oil seeds, algae, other fats, oils and greases, agricultural residues, forestry residues, wood mill waste, municipal solid waste streams, wet wastes, manures, wastewater treatment sludge, dedicated energy crops. This vast resource contains enough feedstock to meet the projected fuel demand of the US aviation industry, supply additional volumes of low-carbon fuels for use in other modes of transport, and produce high-value bioproducts and renewable chemicals. A similar biomass mix is available in Europe. Biofuels are the answer to air travel. If it can be done in the US, where the issue has been studied most intensively, it could probably be done everywhere. Arguably, biofuels are also the answer to longer-haul maritime travel, where bulk shipping will diminish. At present, 40% of bulks are used to transport fossil fuels, which for the most part are going away. 15% of bulks transport iron ore, and the green hydrogen or direct electrolysis routes for reduction, previously discussed, are more readily done nearer mines, instead of shipping coal and raw iron ore to the same port for iron and steel manufacturing. Ammonia and synthetic methanol are strong current contenders, but the IEA's e-fuels report from early 2024 makes it clear that they will be 4 to 6 times as expensive as current fuels, while biodiesel and biokerosene will be 2 to 3 times as expensive. The economics, including policy decisions to price in externalities, will drive the choice and the speed of transition. Perhaps hydrogen gas has a role that it may play when combined with carbon. There is a large lobby, led of course by the fossil fuel industry, which is attempting to commercialise carbon capture and storage. The argument goes that production plants which produce CO2 could have some of it captured. It could then be reacted with hydrogen, have the oxygen removed, and the resultant hydrocarbon could be used as a sustainable fuel. We doubt if this ever could be commercialised to where it could compete with biofuels. Even if it could be done, it would never be as clean as naturally produced carbon using the sun's energy for photosynthesis, the process whereby radiant energy from the sun is used by the leaves of plants to capture or fix carbon from the atmosphere. Storage and electricity generation. Stored hydrogen could be burned in gas turbines, which would generate electricity in times of shortage. This proposition, while feasible, has a multiplicity of losses associated with it. First, 35% of the energy is lost in turning water into hydrogen, and a further 40% at least is lost turning the hydrogen back into electricity. The overall efficiency of this arrangement is 42%. This figure does not consider the capital investment needed to build the piping arrangement and the pressurized storage tanks where the hydrogen is accumulated. The alternative way of storing electricity would be in batteries. Here, there would be the normal losses associated with battery operation, but the efficiency of this method would be closer to 90%. Furthermore, solid or liquid thermal storage technologies are emerging for applications such as domestic water heating, cooking, and some industrial processes. With the right market incentives and public education, this can reduce demand peaks to better balance demand and supply on the grid. When released directly into the atmosphere, hydrogen itself can interact with other gases and vapours in the air to produce powerful warming effects. Indeed, a new UK government study has put these interactions under the microscope and determined that hydrogen's global warming potential, GWP, is about twice as bad as previously understood. Over a 100-year time period, a ton of hydrogen in the atmosphere will warm the Earth some 11 times more than a ton of CO2, with an uncertainty of plus or minus 5. How does hydrogen act like a greenhouse gas? One way is by extending the lifetime of atmospheric methane. Hydrogen reacts with the same tropospheric oxidants that clean up methane emissions. Methane is an incredibly potent greenhouse gas, causing some 80 times more warming than an equivalent weight of CO2 over the first 20 years. But hydroxyl radicals in the atmosphere clean it up relatively quickly, while CO2 remains in the air for thousands of years. So CO2 is much worse in the long run. Hydrogen is a vital component of the global decarbonisation drive in a host of chemical industries, both as a feedstock and energy supplier. It has a role to play in steel making, glass making, cement making, and possibly in long-range shipping. In terms of quantities, the world already uses 93 million tonnes of hydrogen as feedstock. Actually, this means that more are manufactured, and the difference is the losses that occur. Of the order of 300 million tonnes would be needed to decarbonise steelmaking. Although not yet commercialised, hydrogen can be used in glassmaking to bring the glassmaking furnace to 1,600 degrees Celsius. It is hard to tell if long-distance shipping will use ammonia as the means of propulsion. The real question facing proponents of hydrogen is cost. There is a major loss of energy when electricity is converted into hydrogen. This suggests hydrogen production will happen where the cheapest green electricity is available. This will not be in Northern Europe. It will be in desert areas where there is intense radiation from the sun. The resultant hydrogen will be transported as ammonia. On the basis of cost, electricity will power every other energy-needing process. For most transport and heating needs, electricity is the cheaper solution. Hydrogen will always suffer from inherent inefficiency compared with electricity, as some 35% of the energy in electricity is lost in the manufacture of green hydrogen. EU hydrogen targets. As mentioned, EU efforts to establish hydrogen as a clean fuel were criticised by the EU's audit body in a damning report published in May 2024, which found that, despite €18.8 billion in funding, the bloc will not achieve its unrealistic targets. The European Court of Auditors, ECA, said the European Commission did not undertake robust analyses before setting production and import targets totalling 10 million tonnes of renewable hydrogen by 2030. The EU targets turned out to be overly ambitious. Based on the available information from member states and industry, the EU is unlikely to meet them by 2030, the report said. Its lead author, Stef Blok, told the Financial Times hydrogen was vital to the EU's ambitions to reach net zero emissions by 2050, but the targets were not really founded upon the capacity at hand. In 2020, targets of at least 6 gigawatts of renewable hydrogen electrolyzers installed in the EU and production of around 1 million tonnes of green hydrogen per year by 2024 were adopted. The Commission set more ambitious targets in 2022, part of a strategy to wean the bloc off Russian fossil fuels after Moscow's invasion of Ukraine. These stipulate that the hydrogen must come from renewable sources and exclude so-called low-carbon hydrogen, whose production is powered by either nuclear energy or gas with carbon capture. But industry representatives have repeatedly said the targets were unattainable and that the sector needed more support. In a letter to the Commission, the FT reported that industry body Hydrogen Europe warned, "Europe needs to move from the notional inclusion of hydrogen in the energy mix to an earnest development of the hydrogen economy." Consumption of renewable hydrogen in Europe in 2023 was just 0.11 million tonnes, and Europe currently has only 324 megawatts of green electrolyzers, according to Hydrogen Europe, far below the Commission's target. The ECA report found that while EU funding for hydrogen-related projects had reached €18.8 billion, of the 24 member states that had submitted plans for how they would decarbonise their economies to meet EU targets, only Germany had set a goal for importing hydrogen. None of the countries had set specific targets for hydrogen production in their national strategies. The Commission noted the ECA's critical assessment of the aspirational targets, adding, "We now have to accelerate the deployment and uptake of renewable and low-carbon hydrogen in Europe and further develop this emerging market." The definition of low-carbon hydrogen the Commission will use is due to be published in late 2024. According to a draft seen by the FT, to be considered low carbon, the hydrogen must not be produced with more than 3.38 kilograms of CO2 per kilogram, a level that campaigners have argued is not ambitious enough for the EU to meet its climate goals. There are at least 100 hydrogen pipelines for the gas earmarked for 12 countries, but the vast majority of these projects are either concepts or undergoing feasibility studies. Only one is actually under construction, a 30-kilometre pipeline in the port of Rotterdam, the first leg in a plan to build a European hydrogen network that could reach 28,000 kilometres by 2030 and span 28 countries by 2040, according to the European Hydrogen Backbone, a group of 33 energy infrastructure operators. GasUnie, the Dutch state-owned gas network operator, believes that, as the Netherlands starts using less gas to meet its climate commitments, up to 85% of its pipelines could be converted to carry hydrogen instead. Hydrogen will fulfill the role of a vital niche element in the drive to decarbonise the entire human ecosystem. But beware the distractions of those who profit by the old order. Chapter Key Points. 1. 93 million tonnes of hydrogen are produced for industrial process feedstock today. 40 million of that is to refine crude oil. 2. The balance will increase to serve all the processes that cannot reasonably electrify and cannot continue to use fossil fuels, and where the clean hydrogen option is cost competitive with alternatives. 3. In nearly all other energy-using applications, electrification, not hydrogen use, is the answer, based on the economics, which are, of course, based on the fundamental chemistry and physical limitations. 4. Electrolysis has a ceiling of about 65% efficiency. 5. Fuel cells are significantly less efficient than batteries, from immediate use to life cycle analyses. 6. The more we are distracted with supposed hydrogen use cases, where electrification is the obvious long-term answer, the more time and money we will lose, and the greater the loss to society. 7. Biofuels are the answer to aviation and longer-haul maritime travel needs. 8. Hydrogen will always suffer from inherent inefficiency compared with electricity, making electrification the better option in most cases.